What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Golf Bag Podcast. I'm your host, Redkacheek, and this week we got a pretty full slate of tournaments to play or bet, and we'll be talking about the Truist this week. So PGA Tour this week is at Quail Hollow for the Truist Championship. We also have the One Flight Myrtle Beach Classic, which is the opposite field event, and then assuming they play, we have the Live Golf Virginia event starting on Thursday in Washington, D.C. So we will talk about Quail Hollow, the length. I think there was some discussion on how long Doral was last week, which I brought up in my article. We talked about a little bit, posted on X as well, as far as like how the yardage was broken out, and it was a little bit misleading. So one was, which it contrasts quite closely with Quail Hollow, to be completely honest, because it is a long golf course. But I think the scorecard length is definitely can be deceiving, because you can have par fives add a good chunk of yardage. Some longer par threes obviously add up with some 200 plus yard approach shots. But when the majority of the par fours are all under 475, under 450 even, it's just not a long golf course. Guys are able to hit drivers still. You saw the average driving distance around 290 to 295. So it really is the longer par threes, which is just a couple. And then it's the par fives, which could be 3-shot holes, or they just take their, play up and around the green for their second shot. So it just doesn't play as long as a 7,700 yard golf course shows up on the scorecard. Now, if you take away the par fives, and let's just say, just try to think of an even number, which I'm unprepared for an even number. You could take away, 100 yards or 180 yards on a couple of those holes, the par fives, and then you add, 25 yards to a couple of those par fours. Now, all of a sudden, we have a much different type of golf course. Those par fours are going to be closer to 500, if not over. And those approach shots, now you have guys hitting at 300 yards, 320 off the tee, and they have 200 to 220 in, versus just having wedges in or mid irons, which all these guys hit their pitching wedge on 160, especially under warm conditions and with a little bit of wind helping. So mid irons up through 200 yards is just not a long golf course anymore. A couple of the longer par threes, yeah, you can add it in there, but the par fives was really misleading. And you can take the extreme example of that, of a golf course. So let's just say it had one par five that was 800 yards. You add an extra 300 yards on the scorecard, it's going to look like it's long, and it just doesn't play that way. So looking at the second shots is a good way to do it. And then obviously contrasting that with the par four yardages is a important concept to grasp here. So with that being said, I don't want to talk about too much of Doral. I honestly did not watch much of it outside of the first round. So we will dive into the Truist Championship. We'll jump into the course summary. Now, before we do that, I will go really quickly to last year at the 2025 PGA Championship. Par 71, played 7,600 yards. This is the breakout, if you can see that there, of the approach shots. So you can see, like last week, there was quite a few wedges and mid irons, and a good chunk over 200, but not crazy. Here we have over 50% of approach shots over 200 yards. And you even have 23% of attempts between 175 and 200. And then if you look at the driving, it's just driver heavy. I mean, look at all these numbers: 304, 305, 297, 305, 301, 309, 308, 308. Basically everything is, basically 300 yards off the tee on every single hole. And then there's two, hole 12 and hole 16, that averaged 314 and 317 last year at the PGA Championship. So yes, this one, by all accounts, is very long. Unlike last week that we saw, which obviously Cam Young won, and he's a longer hitter. Doesn't really hold, a lot of water when you look through the rest of the leaderboard. But important concept to basically identify each week is the scorecard length really indicative of the length of the golf course, the effective length of the golf course, or is it just for the scorecard and maybe like the par fives are a little bit elevated, or a couple par threes? You think about TPC Sawgrass, And I want to say on the scorecard, like hole 8 is like 260 on the scorecard. And obviously it's not going to play that except for maybe 240 on one day. So just an important concept. You can look through how Scotty fared as far as strokes gained. Off the tee here, you can gain a little bit more than we saw last week off the tee. Approach is always important, as we talk about, around the green as well. And again, around the green doesn't necessarily just mean chipping and putting. That can just be any of those pitch shots on those par 5s inside of 50 yards. So around the green's a bigger bucket than just literally around the green. Putting, as always, you're going to have to gain some strokes putting to do well. But that is the leaderboard there. A lot of the longer hitters, Scotty, Scheffler, Bryson. Scotty's longer than you think. I mean, he's not a bomber by any means, but definitely above average. Bryson, we know. Taylor Pendrith's a fantastic driver of the ball. Vegas is one of the longest hitters on tour. And you got a mix in there. JT Post and Denny McCarthy. Both of those guys gained very little off the tee, and they made it up around the green or on approach and then putting. So there's ways to get it done. Those are obviously harder to peg. Guys like using that term around here, but that's obviously not really what you want to focus on. I mean, being in your player pool for sure, but for guys that should win here, that profile of JT Post and Denny McCarthy, if you go down, see if there's anybody real short that kind of stands out. Let's see. Taylor Moore's not super long. Aaron Rai for sure. He lost strokes off the tee, still finished in the top 20 with incredible approach number. But overall, everybody is just extremely long off the tee. You look at off the tee numbers, Bryson, Marco Penge, Xander Schauffele, those guys struggled in other areas that didn't bode well for their finish position. Taylor Pendrith, Michael Thorbjornsen, fantastic. Obviously lost strokes around the green there. That hurts. Daniel Berger's one of the shorter guys. By all accounts, Ryan Gerard, Scotty Scheffler, Jon Rahm. So off the tee, definitely a big part of it. Approach, always a good lean. You can see that's even, stronger correlation. You got T2, T8, Aaron Rai up there, T8, T5, T8 first. I mean, approach on longer shots, you can definitely separate yourself from the field in that aspect. And then we can just look at putting really quickly. Not as good, which is nice to see. I mean, some good finishers in here, but we got T55, T60, T50, not as great around the green. Besides Scotty doing really well, everyone else in here, not great. It's a mixed bag. You can look at spectrum as well. Off the tee, not as predictive from a spectrum perspective. Approach, much better, which is similar to strokes gained, not too different. And then as far as raw driving distance, Bryson was leading the field, finished second. Xander second, finished T28. Marco Penge. You can look at the driving accuracy, not crazy. We can look at the finish. Driving accuracy right around 50 to 60%. So that is definitely not the priority. It is driving distance A, trying to hit fairways, obviously, but the distance perspective is much more illustrative of where guys can gain strokes on this golf course. So that is number one. And I don't think I'm telling anything secret, right? Like it's this one. I just think there's more of a case by far that this is a longer golf course than we saw at Doral, despite this being a little bit shorter on the scorecard. It is a par 71 that plays into it. But you can see like this is very heavy drivers, very long drivers, actually. I mean, to be averaging that many tee shots around we'll call it 297 to 305, and you still have that many approach shots, 175 to 240 yards. Pretty good. Really, really good as far as distance goes. So looking at the golf course, Quail Hollow on the scorecard for the PGA Tour, it's not going to play as long as the PGA Championship. Par 71, 75, 83. Still very long, very difficult. You can see most of these holes play above par except for the par 5s. And there's 3 par 5s and a couple of the par 4s. Hole 14 is 344 on the scorecard, and hole 8 is 346 on the scorecard. So besides those 2 par 4s and the 3 par 5s, it's a very difficult tee to green golf course for sure. So with that being said, I mean, one of the things you can look at when you go course to course, and maybe it'd be helpful to have like a comparison. Um, we have a course snapshot that summarizes all the golf courses on the PGA Tour and Live. There's probably some metrics we can derive that gives us a better inclination of the distance impact. But you can see here, like the average par 3 is 207 yards, par 4, 453, average par 5, 571. And if we look at Doral from last week, go back, you can see pretty close. 209 par 3, 446 of average par 4, a little bit lower, about 10 yards average less. And then par 5 substantially higher. So again, the par 5 really added most of that length that we saw from last week. So with that being said, let me pull up the correlations and the driving. So actually going to start on the right side today. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. So on the right-hand side here, just something to be aware of. Again, it's your decision on how much you want to apply as far as course fit, but definitely distance is like the overarching theme at this golf course. And I don't think there's any arguments I can make. I think some people had pushback on Doral, but mathematically you can obviously see how much shorter Doral played on the score, or in reality versus on the scorecard. Now here, the tour average on the PGA Tour, 299.3 average driving distance. Here it's 306, so an extra 7.5 yards. So it's just more preference on distance. Some of the holes cater to longer drives anyways, but you can just see it's a very driver-heavy golf course. Driving accuracy is down. That goes hand in hand with driving distance. Like as distance goes up, the accuracy will go down. Outside of Kapalua, that's the only exception there. And then the distance penalty, this is super small, but like little bits up and down is definitely reflective of the golf course profile for sure. So like the distance penalty here is a little bit higher than the tour average. And all that means is basically any drive that's hit less than the average on that hole is going to lose basically 0.18 strokes to the field. So that's a big deal. And that's more than what an average PGA Tour course is. The missed fairway penalty is lower. So again, driving distance over driving accuracy, those are the two metrics on that chart. And then the approaches, you can just see that there's a lot of approaches, 200 plus, 175 to 200. Green regulation is much lower, goes hand in hand with that. And then let's see, anything noteworthy. I mean, bogey or worse is going to be 8% higher than the tour average. Not too surprising with the green regulation rate going down. It's not quite 1-to-1, but you can see here green regulation about 6% less than the tour average. So the bogey or worse rate is about 8% higher. So again, it's not perfectly 1-to-1 correlated, but as green regulation goes down, the bogey or worse tends to go up or should go up. And then putting, nothing too crazy there. Birdie or better's lower. Not too crazy. That's obviously not adjusted for the course, but the birdie or better for the entire event. So how are we approaching it this week? Obviously, distance is a huge part, but if you can look through our stat correlations, distance is not a big bucket at all. Like there's nothing here. You can go through each of those different time frames. Bogey or worse is one of the interesting niche stats, I'll call it. Outside of that, it's all, as people think, is boring, but that's just the way good golf modeling is. It's the adjusted total strokes gained, the adjusted total, and we have some spectrum total numbers in there as well. But driving distance as a whole is not in there. Off the tee is. So use off the tee. Bogey or worse is the second most predictive stat in the 2-year look back. I like that quite a bit. Off the tee obviously is popping up there, but driving distance singular is not a huge factor as far as lead-in predictability, but off the tee certainly is. So looking at total strokes gained, adjusted, bogey or worse, you can see even in the 6-month look back, the bogey or worse is a pretty high stat, which just goes with the best ball strikers. I mean, those are obviously very much in line with each other week to week. And then off the tee in the 9-month look back, so that's probably where we'll have the biggest bump in adjusted off the tee. and spectrum off the tee in the 9-month look back and in the 12-month look back. So overall, though, you can look through this chart here. I mean, the green is 12 months, the red is 24 months, which is a 2-year look back inside of 50 rounds. So we're looking at guys that are just doing really well relative to the field, adjusted numbers, strokes gained tee to green, bogey or worse, off the tee. We can use spectrum total and spectrum tee to green. And the best players tend to perform the best here. We'll jump down to the bottom really quickly at the actual PGA Tour winners. Rory McIlroy, Wyndham Clark, Rory McIlroy, Max Homa, Jason Day. I mean, obviously, McIlroy, Clark, McIlroy are exceptionally long off the tee. Wyndham Clark potentially is longer than Rory is off the tee. He's just not a more efficient driver than Rory is. But it's going through every single leaderboard. You can see clearly the distance aspect as far as off the tee goes is a big part. This is also toggleable to look at the guys gaining and where they're gaining leading into it. So 8 weeks, 6 months, 1 year. Off the tee is really the trending factor. Even approach, guys kind of come in here with okay form, not great, and do really well. Off the tee, though, seems like the most stable stat across all the winners leading into it. Over a year, and even over 8 weeks, clicking through those. Rory in 2021 was kind of an outlier in a sense. Just played really well, likes Quail Hollow. But yeah, he was not playing well during that event or leading into that event. So we'll go back up here really quickly and talk through the approaches. Let's see as far as driving goes. We'll just finish out the driving conversation. Again, I'm not going to beat a dead horse as far as the driving distance goes. We'll prefer off the tee. No harm in using driving distance as like a little bit of a buffer, as like a complementary stat in FGB Studio. But you can see year over year, strongly favors distance or favors distance, going through all of these. So distance is certainly a big part of it. Again, not to beat a dead horse. I think you guys get the gist. And it's just a lot. Contrasting with last week, I think, is the interesting thing, at least for me, because I think there was so much discussion around the distance for Doral, and in reality, that's not how the golf course plays. But for Quail Hollow, yes, 100%, it's going to be a big task off the tee. So as far as like other courses that are similar, when we look through a couple of the metrics for driving, these are the three: importance of hitting the fairway, importance of driving distance, and difficulty of hitting the fairway. So importance of hitting the fairway, a little bit less. That kind of aligns with the Torrey Pines North course. Ironically, with Harbortown, that just goes with the missed fairway penalty, not the distance. When we go across, we can see Memorial Park is very similar. TPC Southwind. And then on the right-hand side, as far as difficulty of hitting the fairway, it's in line with Sentosa Golf Club, Plantation, the Plantation course at Kapalua, and the Pete Dye Stadium course. So a little bit of the desert golf aligns here in California, I guess, with Torrey Pines. As far as approaches go, we just kind of touched on this quickly. 200 plus is a huge bucket. And in FGB Studio, like if you're ever curious about how we've talked about the volatility of these metrics, the deviation of a good player versus an average player versus a poor player, and how wide those ranges can be. You can go through FGB Studio and back test those prior years, looking at the approach numbers of 175 to 200 and 200 plus. Maybe we do that today for fun. And you can kind of get an idea of, is that really as predictive? Because the guys play different courses over the course of 8 weeks or 3 months, 6 months, etc. And having different sample sizes, different course difficulties into those greens definitely matters. So 175 to 200, 200 plus may hold some weight, but we can actually backtest that in FGB Studio and see, like, was that a benefit to looking at in those years, or was it better to just use strokes gained off the tee, or just strokes gained approach? Maybe we use approach from, a bigger bucket, 150 to 200. Ironically enough, a lot of times you'll see guys Scotty's a good example where any course, he pretty much does well with his irons over the last couple of years. We know how good he's been. But he could go to a golf course in a bucket that, even Rory to a certain extent. Maybe they go to a bucket that doesn't perfectly fit their profile at that point, but in other ranges around there, they've been excelling. And that can carry over for sure. So like 150 to 175 doesn't look like it would be something you would want to target. But interestingly enough, if there's a bigger sample in that range versus 200 plus, you might see more correlation in those, prior back testing in that range than you would in 200 plus, just because of the volatility in those approach shots. So we can look at that. Actually, we'll do that today. Difficulty of hitting the green. This is one of the top courses of missing the greens here. Importance of hitting the green is low. So an interesting dynamic there. Obviously approach is important, but there's less penalty for missing greens here because a lot of guys are going to miss a lot of greens. And that aspect is pretty much the same on these long golf courses. And just, thinking through that logically, if you play a golf course, everyone starts with a tee shot and they work their way up, right? And they have different opportunities. They have different approach shots in. If you started around the green and everybody was like, flip a coin, 50-50 if they're going to miss the green or hit the green, it's not going to make a huge difference in someone's scorecard. If it's literally going to be 50 to 60% difference, that's not a big edge for somebody to gain strokes on the field. It's really that position off the tee and giving themselves a better than a 50-50 chance, which goes a lot into off the tee. So my view is always starting from the tee box, understanding where the edge is as far as the profile, whether it's just straight distance or if it's accuracy, having that advantage into the greens is going to be more predictive than from a field perspective of just hitting the green. Proximity to the hole, this is probably the toughest golf course really on the PGA Tour as far as proximity goes. And then looking through a few of the course comps, interestingly enough, these are actually pretty close outside the fairway difficulty for like Innisbrook. But we got Pinehurst number 2. Again, a very long golf course, par 70, 7,500 yards. Driving distance is a huge factor. Obviously, approaches to the right tiers and the right spots on those greens. So Pinehurst number 2 is our top course comp. Caves Valley, another course, par 70, 7,600 yards. So you can see a theme there. But then interestingly enough, Copperhead is number 3. And if you think about that from the approach standpoint, those approach shots are much more in line with what we see here at Quail Hollow. The driving distance is not a comp in any sense, right? Like they're going to be hitting much fewer drivers at Copperhead than they do here. But as far as the approaches on a par 71, 73, 52, it might not stand out, but you can see the how similar. If we do this, we'll toggle off. We look at proximity, fairway importance, distance importance. These are very close, all things considered. Green regulation difficulty is up there. Green regulation importance is about the same. Really, the only difference is the distance and the fairway difficulty. So a little bit more importance to hit the fairway at Copperhead than here. But outside of that, a lot of these points are almost dead on in terms of tee to green play. So an interesting look. You can look at Pinehurst number 2, very, very, very similar. Caves Valley, not as close. It's a little bit closer on these bottom 3 points. A little bit of fairway importance. Proximity is just off the charts. So there's really no golf course that's that close. So just an interesting look at it. I think these two are pretty self-explanatory in terms of the distance. Like, yeah, those look similar. And then you think about the second shots on the Copperhead course, very, very, very close. So with that being said, I don't think I have too much. Let's see here. Anything? We haven't looked at Spectrum in a while. Let's look at Spectrum from last week. We'll do the last 2 weeks. Most of these guys have played. We're just going to see. We're going to look at guys that are both positive in both and the biggest edges. So Victor Hovland is number 1 in our Spectrum approach. Victor Hovland, Sam Burns, Sepp Straka, Daniel Berger, Gary Woodland, Christopher Reeton there, Cameron Young also up there even as good as he's been playing. We can do the same. We can do ball striking overall, which is cool. Do the same thing. We just take a positive on both just to simplify the list. So ball striking wise, off the tee and approach, Hovland, Straka, Burns playing much better than what their strokes gain numbers illustrate to this point over the last 2 weeks. We can go back further if you want and get a better look at it. Again, just throw out some zeros. So Corey Connors is kind of the one that's been trending up. Connors, Hovland, Keegan Bradley, interesting. Gerard, Sepp Straka. Sepp Straka is going to be an interesting play this week after I know he let down Darren last week, but T4, they're very sporadic events, right? Like T18, T2, T13, T8. He's got some missed cuts in there, T50. So volatile. Yeah, Straka is a good one here. Brian Harmon. And then as far as off the tee, just off the tee, let's do the last 12 and get a bigger look at this. Pretty decent sample on all these guys. Castillo is up there a bit. Jake Knapp is a nice edge. Max Homa. I'd be interested to go back to Homa here. You can see his approach has been pretty atrocious. Let's look at his spectrum approach. Still pretty bad. But yeah, Homa's interesting. On a golf course he obviously likes. You can see his course history down here. Win, T8, T8, T60 at the PGA Championship, and he was really playing pretty poorly during that time frame. But yeah, I don't think course history is a big deal in terms of wanting to target only guys that have played well here, because I think you'll see a lot of overlap. Let's do Truist, Quail Hollow. And this is kind of a look at the strokes gained and the finishes at this event. Rory, Jason Day's done pretty well here. You can sort by just total. So yeah, Rory, Xander, Jason Day, Alex Smalley, Homa, Fleetwood, Hovland, makes sense. Justin Thomas as well. So definitely some names that tend to do well on this particular golf course. Jonathan Vegas is kind of all over the place. Corey Connors continues to do pretty well last couple of years. T8, T13, Sung Jam as well. So again, goes into the off the tee number, and then approach can be a differentiator for some of these guys that don't have it as strong as off the tee numbers as some of those top guys do. So with that being said, let's go tinker around a little bit in FGB Studio. So let these models come back, and then I will pull up Truist. Let's tinker, right? Let's go back and tinker. Let's do Truist. Not that one. What was it called before? Wells Fargo, 2024. So let's do two different models. We can do a correlation in each one. So we'll do driving IQ, and we'll do an approach IQ, and we're going to run this back a couple years. Let me shrink it down so you guys can see better now. Okay, a little bit smaller, but now you can see a little bit more. So as we talked about for the driving IQ, long. So let's jump up to long. Now, what do we want to look for? I don't think driving accuracy matters. Green regulation isn't really a driving stat, but I think that's kind of like a good drives in a sense. Like if they're able to hit many greens, even being a little bit crooked, like that's just more illustrative of that golf course. Driving distance, return to par, we don't care about, and then strokes gained. So we can do that. I'll do a min holes, do 10. apply. And then we'll do a couple time frames. So this is last 8 weeks. I'm going to duplicate this. And then instead of 8 weeks, let's do last 9 months. Same thing. And just see what stands out here. And what we're going to look for as this loads is this number right up here as far as the correlation. So you can see the driving IQ on that first one in the last 8 weeks. We can tinker with the weights a little bit too and see if that changes anything. Like if we just did strokes gained of those two, pretty good. You add in distance, pretty good. 310 to 330 will take off. So you see there that made it worse. So we want to add in 310 to 330 strokes gained. Okay. Let's see if greener regulation bumps it up at all. Nope. Keeps it about the same. And then 310 to 330 bumps it up a little bit too. So that would probably be the two first clicks if you just wanted to like backtrack a little bit on the driving numbers and how those relate. So pretty good. This is, you can see if you ran this raw, this is just strictly driving. This is the 2024 Wells Fargo. You would have got Rory in the top 10 as a winner. Benny on number 3 or finished third was number 4. The rest of these guys didn't finish great, but all in all, if you go to the very bottom of this list, you'll see a bunch of poor finishes. Denny McCarthy's an outlier there. T52, T58, 68, T34, T60, T64. So that pretty much lines up closely. Now let's see approach IQ. So same thing. We can do all shots. We can do primary rough. Let's do par threes, first cut. Let's just do long approaches. So what do we want to look for? So typically, I do like to peek at greener regulation for these longer buckets. I think that's a bigger, you think about sample size from a shot perspective. If you think about sample size also from a binary yes or no, I like that quite a bit versus the proximity with a standard deviation of almost the exact proximity. So if it's like 48 feet and it's also a 40-foot standard deviation. So we can look at proximity for a couple of these smaller buckets. I don't care about it in this range. Return to par is got a putting component in there. And then strokes gained is fine. Last 8 weeks, we'll run it this way first and see what it looks like. And then we can kind of tinker with it. So interestingly enough, running this wide open on those long approaches have no signal in terms of correlation with finish position. So when you think about, and we can shrink this down, take off the 175 to 200 and just do like 200 plus, it adds up a little bit more. Okay, that's good. So we'll take out 175 to 200. 200 to 225, and we have 225 to 250. We can we'll do one at a time. So let's do strokes gained. Pretty weak. Okay. Let's do greener regulation. A lot better. So you can see how greener regulation there proves out in this 1 year. That is 200 to 225 greener regulation. Rory was second in this list. Sungjae was fourth, finished fourth. Taylor Pendrith was 10th. Jason Day, Benny On. A couple of mediocre finishes in the middle there. Couple rounding out the top 20 that finished in the top 10. All in all, pretty good. Again, Denny McCarthy there at the bottom. Serious outlier, right? That is 200 to 225, and we're at 0.18. So let's do green regulation for 225 to 250. Also pretty high. Let's add them together. Even better. So now we're at 0.23, okay? Let's do the last one, which is strokes gained. Moderate, a little bit of a bump down. Let's see if it goes up with it or goes down. It goes down a little bit. Yeah, but not terrible. pretty good collection if you look through that list. So you got Nick Dunlap somehow, number 1 in those proximity numbers and green regulation numbers, finished T24, interestingly enough. Then you got Rory first, Sungjae M T4, Xander Schauffele second, Benny On third. A lot of mediocre finishes in there. You know, we're not going to model it out to be a perfect, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through the top 20. That would be on another level of of predictiveness for a one golf course specifically. Mackenzie Hughes in there. So yeah, we can add that together. So now we have a decent look at approach IQ. Those longer buckets was pretty good. Not bad. Driving IQ, pretty good. Not bad. This one was the longer term look back. We can just see quickly if any of these stood out real strong. If not, we can skip it. So that one was pretty weak. Not bad. So 290 to 310 strokes gain was very good over a 9-month look back. I like that. So we'll use that one. Let's keep going. 310 to 330 green regulation, pretty good. We'll use that. 310 to 330 driving distance, no signal, so no point in using that one. And then 310 to 330 was actually weak. So we're going to use this one and this one. And that actually bumped it up even higher. So you can see the leaderboard here in 2024. We got Xander finished second, Rory finished first, Adam Scott T29, Sungjae T4, Matthew Pavon 67th, not great. Sepp Straka T8, Benny On third. Pretty good. So we're going to hop over to the summary and we'll just weight these a little bit. And how we want to weight them, we can kind of tinker around a little bit, just see what looks good. And we can go to another year and see. Let's do this. I think that's probably outside of evenly split. I guess evenly split's pretty good. So had we run this in 2024, we would have had Rory, Benny On, Xander Schauffele, Sungjae M finish 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 3, 2, 4. Pretty good. Taylor Pender, T10, Sepp Straka, T8. Now, I would always use a standard model and throw in like the field adjusted numbers. So I'll do that really quickly just to illustrate. Adjusted total and tee to green, really simple. And that is last 6 months. We can tinker with last 8 weeks. Last 8 weeks was a little bit better. We can do 9 months just to see. Was actually a little bit worse. So it looks like recent form coming into this was the best path forward. So let's do that. 8 weeks. And we'll run it back. All right, so let me save this model. Wells Fargo 2024, sure. So we'll do one more look. We'll go back to 2023. I'll apply my model I just made. This one. And then we'll just take a little peek at it. Like I said, I would be using, adjusted off the tee, spectrum off the tee, and try to tinker around with, the right combination to see what stands out the most. So we'll run this back here. So right off the bat, pretty good. Let's see. 2023. Did Scotty withdraw? I don't have a finish position for him. What did he do in 2023? Pretty good run for Scotty of not winning. Second place, second place, second place. Was 23? Hold on. Which year was... Go back down here. Wyndham Clark, Rory. Let's see. We'll go back to Rory again. We'll apply that template we just made. So it'll plug these back in exactly how we had it. So this is similar to the old Stat Model Pro where you could back test and then play it forward basically. And then we'll run this for the current year and see how that looks for the top guys. Especially if there's a winner that pops up in the top 10, that's usually a good sign. As far as DFS, obviously the pool would expand beyond just the top 10 or top 20 guys. So that is what we would look at. Let's see, was it 21 right around COVID? Yeah, that's not good. The standard model shows is pretty good. There's some missed cuts in there. Matt Wallace, some really good finishers here, like later in the top 10. Raw missed the cut with small sample size, especially in the last 8 weeks. Look at the driving. I assume the sample's small. Yeah, there's nothing from 310 to 330, so we'll take that off. Okay. And then we'll do the same with approach IQ. Let's go check. Take this one off too. Approach. So this one had no signal, but there's like literally zero shots, not literally zero shots, but very few shots leading into this 2021 event coming into it. So let's run it forward and let's see what we have this week. Truist Championship 2026. Let's use that same model we just made. Since we have similar sample size to what we had 2 years ago. And then once this pops up, we can take a quick look. All right. So not too crazy off the top of the board. We can click through these and just double check the sample sizes. I think these are all pretty good now. Yeah, 290 to 310, plenty of holes. 310 to 330 looks pretty good. Approach IQ, smaller sample in that big bucket, which is not unexpected, which is also why I like the green regulation number there. You can see that here. And then the driving IQ, those buckets look reasonable as well. And the last 8 weeks is a little bit tight for some of these top guys. Alex Fitzpatrick off a good week last week. I don't have his data from the Zurich Classic. There's really no data to look at there anyways. And then Rory hasn't played since Augusta. So looking at that, ranking it down, interestingly enough, right? Like if we use the weights for the standard model and bump that up a little bit more, that'll bring more of those top guys up and move Sudarshan down. But we got Xander #1 this week. Then we have Matt Fitzpatrick, not too surprising, playing fantastic golf. You can look through his profile here. Yeah, I mean, really it's 3 wins if you want to count the Zurich. I don't think I want to count the Zurich, but that's fantastic form, right? The Players Championship, Valspar, the Masters, RBC Heritage. Rory, we know he likes it here anyways. Aberg, Sudarshan stands out quite a bit. That's interesting. Let's look at the Spectrum numbers. Yeah, Spectrum likes it quite a bit. So he's been on a good run. That started the Players Championship. I mean, Cognizant Classic T17, the Players Championship, the Houston Open T5, T6, T14. Really good numbers across the board there. And then going into RBC Heritage, which is a different golf course entirely. And then last week, like the -1.95, Spectrum actually shows them +2.35. So a big discrepancy there in the Spectrum numbers, which gives him a bump up, obviously, for us. Going down a little bit further, guys that make a lot of sense: Gary Woodland, Cameron Young, Nikolai Hogard, just great drivers of the golf ball. Iron play is okay, but really it's that driving IQ number that really elevates them in this model specifically. Siwoo Kim, Justin Rose, interestingly enough, Fleetwood. Cantley somehow always finds his way. Alex Smalley, Pot Guider, that's an interesting one this week. And then Pearson Cootie, like we talked about last week. We'll take a look at his profile. He was hurt with a wrist or back a couple weeks ago. You can see how well he did to start the year off. Then he got hurt, and it's really been a struggle. So I think it's worth buying low. He's still relatively cheap. He's at 6,900 in this field. So 6,900 for Pearson Cootie is a good option. Alex Fitzpatrick, feeling good, playing well in the DP World Tour, comes over here and wins the Zurich. Don't mind staying on that, and he's still really cheap. Like, he didn't get any type of bump up, which makes sense. He wasn't overly owned last week at all anyways. So that's a big part of the DK algorithm for pricing. Adam Scott makes sense. Sam Stevens looks really good. Jake Knapp, obviously. So that is pretty much it. If we want to sort by DK specifically, I mean, all the top guys look great. No surprise there. Everybody besides Robert McIntyre are all inside the top 10 for the most part. That makes sense. And as we go down, you'll start to see some guys pop that have some pretty good value. So like Jake Knapp, Nikolai Hogard, Justin Rose, Gary Woodland at 7,600. A big part of that was his ownership last week. Spiked a lot. He was at like 30% or 20%. I'm sorry, 20%. And we had him projected around 10 to 12%. So much higher than what we had anticipated for Woodland with the distance narrative last week. Alex Smalley playing well. I did watch him warm up at TPC Sawgrass, and the dude flushes it. Like, it does sound really good. So I'm not going to pull a boots on the ground take on, oh yeah, he's going to play well because his range session went well. But I was very impressed with Alex Smalley, his ball striking on the range at TPC Sawgrass. So someone to keep an eye on, at least for myself. Sam Stevens, 7,200. I like him here. Pearson Cootie, we talked about a little bit. As far as some of the other guys, like on the long, difficult golf courses, like Corey Connors doesn't look great. I still want to play Corey Connors at 7,300. Same with Alex Noren. Going up here a little bit, I would jump back on to Kurt Kitayama as well. And then as far as like the cheap guys go, as we go way down, Sudar Shan, we'll see how popular he is. Aldrich Pot Guider. I just don't see, there's an aspect there that you could argue, right, of a golf course that's long that caters to Aldrich Pot Guider. If he drives it well, then obviously he's going to have some decent opportunities. But everyone's going to hit 50 to 60% of greens. Do you really want to have Pot Guider scrambling on half the holes? I probably don't. I think that's probably I mean, that's his biggest weakness for sure. In a golf course like this, where the distance has a component for sure, but he's still going to have to play the other 50% of the holes he misses the green. I would rather play Sudarshan, especially in that 1-to-1. Taylor Pendrith. This sounds like a really good course for Pendrith, but he's been playing so bad. Yeah. And around the green's been bad. I'd probably skip Pendrith. Last week, I mean, even last week, if you go off of what he was doing prior to that, wasn't much. And then he played well off the tee, approach looked good at Doral, around the green was really bad. I would still be cautious of his around the green game on a golf course like this, where you're going to hit 50% of greens. So, like in my mind, I think about Pendrith. Of all the people, he probably has probably not win equity, but definitely like top 10. But I wouldn't want to be overexposed to that. I think he has just as much chance of finishing DFL as he does as finishing in the top 10. If his around the green game has been this poor, which Spectrum agrees. You can see there, minus 2.77, minus 4, minus 3.7, minus 3.5. So around the green has not been good. Putting is not great either. And then the bottom here is not a lot of anything. I mean, I think, I don't want to speak out of turn. Let's see what Vegas has been doing. He does seem to like this golf course. Yeah, not great. I mean, his best finish is T14 this entire year. Didn't play great last week either. Probably skipped that too. So not a ton. Sungjae, we talked about as far as course history goes. You can see his course history is volatile with missed cuts and top tens. Yeah, this bottom is really, it's really like throwing a dart. Andrew Novak, Poston, Matt Wallace might be interesting. Yeah, I think Wallace is probably good. Like at least looking through his numbers, he's been above average, we'll call it. Like his approach numbers last week were really atrocious. Spectrum gave him a big bump up, so he must have had some water balls in there. I at least would rather see something like this. I would view this as he's somewhat close to playing good golf versus we don't know what he's going to get, what you're going to get this week. So yeah, I think Wallace is a nice cheap option outside of the chalky Sudarshan. And then besides that, I don't know if anybody, Andrew Novak. Not great last week. I think Novak's worth a shot for sure. He's just volatile. You can see the difference in like a Matt Wallace profile versus Novak. Like Novak still kind of spikes randomly, and he did that last year. You know, he has all these missed cuts, some okay finishes, and then top fives, some missed cuts, mediocre, T6, T7. So that's kind of where I stand on these cheap guys. No one really stands out. Really, it's Sudarshan that stands out the most. And then Fitzpatrick, Christopher Reeton again, Max Homa we talked about. So, yeah, I mean, it's honestly pretty much status quo for the top of the board as far as picking out who's going to win. It's likely going to come from one of these top 8 guys is who wins this type of event. And then it's just kind of pairing it around there. I mean, Nikolai Hogard seems like a really good fit. Do strokes gained. Yeah, interestingly enough, his approach is what holds him back. But all right, we're going around in circles. I think that's pretty much it for the top of the board here. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, as far as lineup construction goes, it doesn't seem like it's too crazy to build with like at least one of these top guys, if not two of these, 9-4 plus guys, and then find some scrubs down at the bottom. I think that's very viable this week versus building balanced. I think that's probably the wrong direction to go. So with that being said, I think I'm good for here. We'll take a peek at the weather real quick and then we'll get out of here. Looks ugly. Whoa, real ugly. So this is what the weather looks like. Wednesday looks fine. Thursday got a lot of rain. Looks real bad. And windy. Thursday looks real bad. Friday looks okay. Gets a little bit windy. Not bad. This is fine. Friday's fine. Thursday is a mess. So we'll see what happens and how the radar changes or the weather forecast changes. But yeah, that's an issue. That's a lot of rain. It's 80% chance of rain from 7 a.m. until 2 p.m. Wind gusts around 20 to 30 miles an hour. Steady around 10 to 15. So yeah, Thursday is going to be a chore if they play. So, all right. That is it. We'll hop back here and we'll sign out. So appreciate it, guys. Thank you as always. I know we kind of went around different topics here. There's obviously more than one way to skin a cat. I think building around a base model every week is the tried and true method. And then just kind of tinkering with some, driving IQ, approach IQ. You can play around with the back testing with the different proximities or whatever you want to mess with and see how that holds out. But with that being said, we got Myrtle Beach is loaded in there. You can use that in FGB Studio as well. We'll have odds and tracking for that. And then Live Golf is in FGB Studio, and all that will be in LineupIQ as well. So you can find all of that at fantasygolfbag.com. And without further ado, I'll let you guys get on with your day, building and having fun. And we might be back Wednesday is the plan to have like a live kind of walk through workspace session. So more to come there. I will announce that when we have a confirmed time. So best of luck, guys. Appreciate it as always. Good luck this week, and we'll see you later. Bye.